Okay, so I am really, really excited for today's video because it's going to be a Gambit video, a trap video, and it's going to be on an opening that really doesn't have so much information online. Very hard to find any sort of commentary or analysis on this opening, which I'm about to show. And if you enjoy the Stafford Gambit, and I'm pretty sure you're going to enjoy the O'Sullivan Gambit, now we'll jump straight in. The O'Sullivan starts as an Alekine's defense. We'll be looking from the black side. Now, the main reply for white in Alekine is to play e5, knight d5, and d4. We should note that if white doesn't go into this position and maybe deviates with a move like knight c3, or after e5 goes for c4, and unfortunately we can't play the O'Sullivan, but after d4, then we are all set to unleash the O'Sullivan, which is pawn to b5 on move 3. Very rare and tricky move. It turns out that there's no games in the Masters database. However, on Lichess, there's been about 7,500 games. So apparently, this is a somewhat known opening, but I want to go ahead and break down the tricks and traps associated with this. Of course, black is gambiting the b pawn, which white is very much welcome to take. And I should note that this is an objectively dubious opening. If white plays properly, white will have an objective advantage. But that's not to say there's a lot of ways for white to go wrong and stumble into the nasty traps that black has in store, especially for unprepared players. So in this video, we're going to break down the basic traps. We'll look at what happens when white declines the gambit. We'll look at one of the coolest opening traps ever, not just in the Sullivan, but in chess in general. We're going to see a really, really cool opening sequence. And then at the very end, we'll see a counter trap for the white side against the O'Sullivan. So before we get into all the traps analysis, I do want to thank the sponsor of today's video, which is Skillshare. You probably know by now, but Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes ranging from so many different topics, including business, marketing, design, even lifestyle and productivity classes. Now, one class that I've been taking that I'm really enjoying so far is called How to Organize Your Workflow to Maximize Productivity. It's a class by Ali Abdal, who's a doctor and YouTuber, and he's done an amazing job kind of breaking down the science of productivity. And he talks a lot about how to develop the right habits, how to become more self aware, and how to create better systems to just live a more productive life. So, if you want to get access to this course along with thousands of others, I do have a special offer for my subscribers. The first 1,000 people to click the link in the video description below will get a 1 month free trial to Skillshare so you can start learning and exploring everything the platform has to offer. And thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's get back to some chess. Okay, let's dive into some of the basic traps of the O'Sullivan. Now, just as a review, we go into the main line. Pawn b5 marks the beginning of the O'Sullivan. And just to point out the opening database, black scores really well in this opening overall. Almost every line, there is a majority win percentage for black. Even when white accepts a gambit, black is winning 58% of the time. And even though Stockfish won't like this position for black, giving white an almost +2 advantage, on a practical level, there is just a lot of ways that black can get counterplay. And this is one of those cases where, yeah, objectively, white is better, but when it comes to actual gameplay, there's a lot of positions which will just be easier to play for black, not to mention all the tricks and traps. So we're going to focus on the main line, which will be bishop takes b5. And here black will play pawn c5. And I'm going to hide the notation just to not spoil anything. And I should note the reason for giving away the b pawn was to bait the bishop into an undefended square in black's territory. And after c5, black is not only aiming to try and tear apart the white pawn center, but also has a really sly tactical threat of playing queen a5 to attack the king and to attack the bishop. And usually when queen a5 is played, there's a response knight c3, but in many cases, as we're going to see, knight c3 can usually be met with knight takes c3. So one of the main ways white can go wrong here is if white takes the pawn, queen a5 is already practically winning for black, and there's no great response to get out of check and save material. We should start by noting if knight d2 or bishop d2, that blocks a queen from attacking the knight, and black can take the bishop. If the move pawn c3 is played, then there's a very nice line, queen takes b5, queen takes d5, looks like a fair trade. However, after bishop e7, black is getting the last bite, and white is now getting shish kebabbed along the long diagonal, and is either going to lose a queen, or if queen moves somewhere, let's say queen b3, we can trade and then win the g2 pawn along with a rook on h1. I should also mention if king f1, this doesn't help because queen takes b5 comes with check. So white is in big trouble after queen a5. And if we look at the database, this position has been reached over 450 times, and black is winning a very significant percentage of the games. Now, I should mention the best move for white here is to play knight d2, with the idea that after queen takes b5, there's pawn to c4 with a fork, winning back the piece. However, black's still better here after queen c5, pawn takes d5, queen takes d5. There's a double attack in the end, and engine will give almost -2 in black's favor. So going back to this position, if d takes c5 is played, queen a5 already gives black a significant advantage. And dc5 is the third most popular move, so played a good amount of the time. Another way white can go wrong is knight f3, played about 200 times, even though there's some transpositions here. And after queen a5, again, black is doing quite well. Many cases, white will just end up losing the bishop. Like if knight c3, here's where we can take on c3, and at bc3. We don't want to take because then bishop d2 defends the rook and hits the queen, but we just take on b5, and black is up a clean piece with already a decisive advantage. So turns out in this position, white still has the same resource, knight d2, which some people will find, and after queen takes b5, there is pawn c4. However, here black can very simply just slide back to a5, cd5, and take on d4, hitting the pawn on d5. Computer gives some kind of level equality, but it's still a very dynamic position. Black has a prospect of bishop a6 to potentially disrupt white's castling. And these pawns, even though they look strong, they can be very easy targets for black, especially if black can keep putting up pressure. So this pretty much covers the main idea of the O'Sullivan, is when the bishop is baited to b5, we play c5, and there's a lot of ways for white to go wrong. Now I want to move on to the O'Sullivan declined. And I know there's a lot of players out there that just have the philosophy of just don't accept any gambits, play it safe. So a lot of players will play a move like knight f3. And this is where we can still be aggressive and play pawn c5. And I think it's very typical in this opening, regardless of what white plays on move 4, black is very likely to respond with c5 on the next move. So after knight f3, pawn c5, white now has a few options which pawn to take. If we take a look at bishop takes b5, we'll notice this is a direct transposition from what we just saw with a double attack. And if white takes on c5, the most common move, then black can very simply defend the knight with pawn e6, while also attacking the pawn on c5. This pawn is not easy for white to defend. Note that the knight on d5 discourages bishop e3 and also pawn b4. So it's most common for white to play pawn c4 here. And the line I'll show is actually the most common line that white will play. After bc4, bishop c4, we can reinforce the knight. And this is another common idea of the O'Sullivan, is to get the bishop on the long diagonal and have some really nice lasting pressure against white's kingside, and also just have good harmony between the bishop and the knight, and potential later for some discoveries. For example, there's some crazy idea later to play g5, knight f4, rook g8, and target the g-pawn. Of course, this is just a more long-term idea if you want to be super, super aggressive in the middle game. Going forward from here, most players will castle, black can regain the pawn, and most people play knight to c3, after which we can trade, and queen c7, and we're reaching a position where the bishops are really, really nice along these two nice diagonals. With queen c7, we're not only pressuring e5, which is obviously a target, but we're also pressuring the bishop on c4, which is not defended, which means we're threatening bishop f2 and queen takes c4. So most players play bishop to b3, protecting the bishop, and after knight c6, black is already doing quite well, has a lot of nice pressure against the e-pawn. Computer will give already a pleasant advantage for black, almost a one-pawn advantage, despite material being equal. And if white plays the most common move, bishop f4, 97 is a nice move, just unleashing the bishop and preparing to play knight g6, with all the minor pieces having attacking potential on the king side. So that's just a quick summary of O'Sullivan Declined. So now comes a time where we're going to see one of the coolest traps I've ever seen, at least one of the coolest traps I've seen in recent memory. Moving on to chapter 5, we are going to dive back into the O'Sullivan Accepted with bishop takes b5. And remember, we play c5, preparing the double attack against the king and bishop. And here, one of the most common moves for white is pawn c4. And if white were to play this, then they're already likely to walk into a really, really awesome trap. So I don't want to spoil things too much, so I'm going to hide the notation. Now we're going to see just an incredible sequence of moves, starting with a very surprising pawn takes d4. The point of this move is that we are still having the idea of queen a5 in the event of pawn takes knight. We win back the minor piece, and black is actually going to come out ahead here if bishop d2. We take the bishop, and now we're actually threatening both pawns. Maybe it's more likely for white to play queen d2. After takes, we do lose the d-pawn. However, after bishop a6, black is doing really, really, really well. Now that queen f1 is just a hard to stop threat. And if the knight develops to protect f1, now e2 is unguarded and queen e2 is just checkmate. So the best try for white here would be knight d2, but after the move pawn to e6, white's position is already just kind of crumbling given that the pawn is attacked. If the pawn moves to d6, which looks a little bit troublesome for black, then there's knight c6, hitting the queen, hitting the pawn. This is not even the cool trap yet. This is just a sideline, but we can see in the opening database, there have been a handful of games that have reached this position. Engine will give already, man, Engine is pretty savage, giving already minus 7.4 for black. I guess, yeah, all of white's things are crumbling, and there's still potential for some nastiness along the light squares. So let's go back to the even more beautiful trap. Let's say white doesn't take the knight, but rather captures a pawn on d4, which is the most common move. Most players who get into this will realize that queen a5 is an idea, and they'll be inclined to take. It looks like white is doing quite well, has a nice center, the knight is still attacked, but here black can throw a really nice counterpunch, knight to b4, threatening the triple fork with knight c2. It seems like black shouldn't be causing too much headache for white, given that the knight is the only piece developed. Most players will respond with knight a3 here, just defending c2. But here's where black delivers yet another nice punch in the position, queen a5. Of course, with the obvious discovery threat, black is now threatening the discover triple fork, which would cause white a lot of misery. But black also has a really secret threat with queen a5. Most players will play bishop to d2 here, and this is where black can unleash a really, really surprising move. And I encourage those who maybe don't see the move already to pause the video and find the soul-crushing move for black in this position. And now I want to congratulate everyone who found the amazing queen takes a3. Yes, this is an oh no my queen moment, but here if white just takes back, we're going to win the queen straight back, and in the process, black has won a minor piece and just has a decisive advantage. So queen takes a3 is a start of what is going to lead to even more beauty. Most players here will play queen e4, realizing the danger. And after queen e4, black is still under some pressure. The rook is now attacked, the queen is still hanging, the knight is pressured, and black still has to come up with some moves to survive. Here we can take on b2, attacking the rook. And now if white takes on a8, we take on a1. It's a trade of rooks, but black is getting some more fun in this position. If king e2, we take on e5, attacking the king, defending the knight. Black is already having a decisive advantage. So going back here, most players will play rook to b1, and it still looks like black is under some pressure. The queen's attacked, the rook is attacked on the a8. And here, there's a couple winning moves for black. When I give this position to most people, they'll say knight c2, which is actually the easier move to find, but it's not the absolute best move. Knight c2, the position can still get murky after king e2, takes, it's still a bit of a mess. So rather than knight c2, there's a really aesthetic way for black to completely solve all of the problems in the position and just wind up material. And that move is queen takes e5, leveraging yet another potential fork in the position. This time, if queen takes queen, there is knight to d3. Black wins back the queen, and if we count material, black is up a knight and a pawn and just has a winning position. So this is just a really beautiful sequence. If we see just kind of a fast motion replay, even starting with pawn takes d4, surprising move, knight b4 threatening the fork, queen a5 threatening the discovered triple fork, and then the queen goes on a journey to take on a3, to take on b2, and then to take on e5. Not every day you see the queen going on a path like this, sacrificing itself multiple times, but in every case, the tactics work out for black, and this is winning. Congratulations to the 5 players who have reached this position. I guess 4 players have actually converted this position as black, but it's a nice one to know, and it's one that is definitely on my bucket list. I hope to achieve someday in life. So going back, I do want to be thorough here and just point out a few things according to the engine. After knight a3, it turns out the best move is actually a6. Now, this doesn't lead to the same amount of beauty, but it does give black a better position because after bishop a4, queen a5 is a more simple double attack, and black is winning material here. The actual problem with queen a5 immediately is white has queen e4, and surprisingly, black is actually worse here, even though there's a lot of discoveries. Computer gives a plus for white. Now, no one has ever found the move queen e4, so I don't think it's something to worry about. And I could say that if I get this position, I would be playing queen a5, going for the really fancy walk of the queen to win all of white's material. So I really hope those watching have enjoyed this trap and maybe can use it in some of their own games. Now, I do want to finish the video with one counter trap against the O'Sullivan. We're going to move on to chapter 6 and look at what happens when white is really well prepared. So let's get to our main position. Here, white will accept the gambit. And after pawn c5, let's imagine you are playing against O'Sullivan. You want to trap black in this case. The move to play is bishop to c4, which is actually a nice move. It gets the bishop out of the potential danger of queen a5. It also keeps initiative against the knight. And here, a lot of O'Sullivan players will be inclined to take on d4 using the idea that we've seen multiple times so far is if bishop takes d5, there's queen a5, and it looks like black will just be winning back material. However, in this position, white has an amazing way to stay up material. And it starts with a surprising move, knight c3, offering the knight basically for free. Let's say black takes it. Now, in this position, it looks like white can snag the rook. However, that would just end tragically after pawn takes b2, bishop d2, black can promote to queen, win back the rook. Black now temporarily has two queens on the board, and whichever queen is taken, the other queen will survive, and black is doing completely fine here. A2 will hang in some variations. So going back to this position, this is white to move and win. So I don't want to give too many clues, but feel free to pause the video and try and find the best move for white and the only winning move for white in this position. Okay, so the key to winning this position as white is to defend against the threat of pawn takes b2 while not giving black time to actually save the rook. For example, if we play a move like pawn b3, that gives black time to play knight c6 and black is okay. So the best move to play in this position is an amazing pawn to b4, hitting the queen, the rook is still hanging, and white is going to be up a lot of material at the end of this. And I should note there's no en passant here. En passant doesn't work when you have a pawn on the third rank. If you're confused, you can Google en passant. But yeah, white is winning here. And this means that black should not enter this line. If you encounter bishop c4, the better move to play is just bishop e7. And you can still treat this as a gambit style position where you have the bishop on the long diagonal targeting g2. Very often black can develop with e6, knight c6, there's still queen a5 potential, and the game can be very much of a fight from here. So I tried to be thorough with kind of covering the critical lines. For those that have questions, leave them below and I'll try and answer as many as I can. Also, feel free to study on your own in the Lichess study. I'll be leaving a link so you'll have this full analysis along with all the annotated chapters. You can use Opening Explorer, you can use Stockfish, and that's just an easy way to perhaps answer some of your questions immediately. But yeah, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I know it's a different sort of opening. I've been wanting to make content on this opening for a while. And if there's any openings that you'd like to see me cover in future videos, feel free to leave suggestions below. And I'll see you in the next video.